The FIA has just declared that Christian Horner's dismissal was unlawful. Stick around until the end if you want to find out which clause was violated and the huge fine that will have to be paid. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The entire Formula One landscape has been thrown into turmoil following a bombshell revelation by the FIA that has rocked the motorsport world to its very foundation. In a decision that stunned insiders, rattled team principals, and left fans in disbelief, the sports governing authority declared that Red Bull Racing's recent ousting of Christian Horner was not just rushed or mishandled, it was fundamentally unlawful. The FIA's legal department, after completing an extensive and highly confidential inquiry, determined that Horner's termination not only violated core procedural standards, but also blatantly ignored key contractual terms that were specifically created to protect him from arbitrary dismissal. What followed was a wave of consequences the sport has rarely seen, culminating in a historic penalty of $40 million against the team, with a staggering $20 million to be awarded directly to Horner for damages, career harm, and breach of legal obligations. Deep within Horner's long-term employment contract was a critical provision that has now become the focal point of a spiraling controversy. This provision, Clause 17.4b, was negotiated and inserted during tense talks at the end of 2021, when Horner was consolidating his power within the team. It was designed to serve as a legal barrier against sudden termination, requiring any potential dismissal to pass through an independent arbitration process. Only if neutral third-party arbitrators could determine that Horner's actions directly undermine the team's integrity or performance could Red Bull proceed with such a measure. But this safeguard was completely bypassed. Rather than adhere to the very framework they had agreed to, Red Bull's top brass opted for a rapid and unilateral decision, orchestrated largely under mounting strain from within their own walls, especially involving the Verstappen camp. The rift between Horner and Max Verstappen had been deepening behind the scenes for months, but few anticipated how much influence Jos Verstappen, Max's father and a powerful figure in the paddock, had in fueling the internal storm. According to individuals close to the situation, Jos had grown increasingly vocal in his opposition to Horner's leadership, blaming him for deteriorating relationships, questionable strategic choices, and a perceived lack of alignment with the team's long-term vision. The internal power struggle escalated to such a degree that Red Bull executives were left divided and under pressure to act decisively. An emergency meeting was convened, the vote was pushed through with haste, and in a shocking twist, 3 senior executives refused to participate altogether, abstaining due to serious concerns about the legality of the decision. Their silence, now seen as a red flag, foreshadowed the legal catastrophe that would soon erupt. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Insiders familiar with the investigation describe the FIA's findings as nothing short of explosive. The report, still under wraps but partially leaked to close affiliates, paints a picture of organizational recklessness, legal negligence, and executive overreach. Red Bull, in its rush to remove Horner, failed to consult external arbitrators, ignored mandatory compliance protocols, and chose expedience over ethics. The ruling wasn't just a rebuke. It was a devastating indictment of how one of the sport's most powerful organizations conducted itself behind closed doors. The FIA's legal experts concluded that Red Bull knowingly violated the very clause they helped draft, and by doing so, opened themselves to unprecedented liability and reputational collapse. For Horner, the aftermath has been both bitter and strangely vindicating. Cast out under a cloud of suspicion and surrounded by speculation, he now stands as a figure wronged by the very institution he helped elevate to championship heights. His legal triumph comes with a substantial financial reward, but perhaps more importantly, it restores a sense of legitimacy to his tenure. Those who once questioned his departure are now re-evaluating the entire episode, wondering whether he was sacrificed to satisfy internal egos or to clear the path for a leadership reshuffle orchestrated behind the scenes. The payout may be massive, but the real currency is narrative. Horner is no longer the fallen commander, but a man whose rights were trampled in a storm of politics and ambition. Within the paddock, the reverberations have been immediate and far-reaching. Team leaders are reportedly re-examining their own executive contracts, with legal departments poring over clauses and contingency plans to prevent similar disasters. Agents are now demanding stronger protections for their clients, while team owners are scrambling to rebuild trust inside their organizations. The FIA's move has also triggered a wider debate about governance and accountability in a sport that often hides its true battles behind a veil of PR statements and sponsor-friendly optics. The spotlight is no longer just on the track, it's on the boardrooms, the private jets, and the confidential meetings where the real power plays unfold. The scandal has not only damaged Red Bull's public image, but also left a gaping leadership void and exposed divisions that were previously contained. The team, once seen as a model of unity and performance, is now fractured by competing interests and shaken by a self-inflicted legal debacle. As they brace for further investigations and potential lawsuits, questions abound. Who authorized the final push to remove Horner? Why were compliance safeguards ignored? And most importantly, what consequences will those responsible now face? Meanwhile, speculation about Horner's future is reaching fever pitch. Will he return to the F1 paddock at the helm of another team, perhaps one eager to tap into his tactical genius and deep industry connections? Could he pivot to a senior position within the FIA or Liberty Media, helping shape the sport's next chapter? Or will he choose a quieter path, stepping away from the limelight with his reputation intact and his point proven? Whatever path he takes, the motorsport world will be watching closely, because the story of Christian Horner is far from over. And as for Red Bull, the damage extends well beyond finances. Their internal culture has been exposed, their decision-making called into question, and their dominance now shadowed by scandal. Rebuilding trust, both internally and with the broader racing community, will not be easy. The fallout has triggered a paradigm shift, a moment of reckoning that could redefine how leadership is protected, challenged, and held accountable in one of the world's most politically complex and fiercely competitive sports. The silence has been shattered, and in its place, a new standard may finally emerge. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The verdict delivered by the FIA's Independent Arbitration Committee didn't simply highlight a technical infraction. It detonated a truth bomb that exposed the chaotic underbelly of Red Bull Racing's inner workings. This wasn't just a minor misstep or a procedural hiccup, it was a full-blown procedural collapse. The panel discovered that not only had Clause 17.4b been completely disregarded, but the mandatory 60-day conflict resolution phase, designed to serve as a cooling-off period for both parties, had been blatantly overlooked. This essential time frame, which could have been used to de-escalate tensions or reach a diplomatic outcome, was tossed aside as if it were an inconvenience. Red Bull's leadership, in a desperate scramble to justify a rushed and highly controversial decision, leaned heavily on ambiguous claims like loss of team cohesion and a vague deterioration of driver trust. But when those justifications were scrutinized, they crumbled. The FIA's panel saw right through the smoke and mirrors. There was no factual foundation, no verifiable documentation, no pattern of negligence or failure on Horner's part that could legitimize such drastic action. In fact, the irony was impossible to ignore. The very person they tried to paint as a liability had successfully kept the team at the top during one of its most volatile and pressure-packed seasons in recent memory. Underneath Red Bull's polished exterior and PR-crafted smiles, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. It wasn't just a leadership dispute, it was a full-blown mutiny simmering beneath the surface. For months, tensions had been steadily escalating between Christian Horner and the squad's biggest weapon, Max Verstappen. What began as subtle resistance eventually exploded into outright hostility. Insider sources revealed that Verstappen issued a chilling ultimatum behind closed doors: remove Horner or he'd walk. Not just walk, he'd enter discussions with Mercedes, Red Bull's fiercest rival. And that wasn't an empty bluff. Mercedes had been lurking for years, waiting for the slightest fracture in Red Bull's armor. The moment Verstappen hinted at a possible exit, the sharks started circling. Red Bull's executives were paralyzed. Lose Horner, and you risk dismantling a management structure built over decades. Lose Verstappen, and you risk immediate collapse on the track. The power balance shifted overnight, and the consequences were seismic. But nothing captured the extent of the implosion like the leaked audio from a private meeting just before Horner's ousting. The recording didn't just expose tension, it revealed war. The dialogue between Horner and Verstappen was raw, unfiltered, and blistering with resentment. Horner, barely containing his fury, confronted Max with a verbal barrage that made the room vibrate. "Let's not pretend, Max," he snapped. "This is your orchestration. Every single thread of this mess traces back to your pride and your father whispering poison behind the scenes. You craved control, you've seized it. But don't insult us by calling this a matter of performance. It's about power. It's always been about power, and now it's consumed you." His voice wasn't just angry, it was wounded, betrayed by someone he once fought to protect. The frustration spilled out in waves, and it painted a picture of a team no longer aligned but fragmented by ambition and egos too large to coexist. Verstappen, cornered and incensed, didn't hesitate to retaliate. With a voice sharp as broken glass, he turned the accusation around and slammed Horner for destroying the team's chemistry. He claimed the principal had lost the dressing room, that he no longer commanded loyalty or trust from those who mattered most. "You care more about shaping your image than holding this team together," Verstappen fired back. "The garage is silent. People are scared to speak. That's not leadership, it's manipulation." The atmosphere in the room was described as electric and unstable, like a storm about to break. No compromises were made, no bridges rebuilt. The confrontation ended in silence, the kind of silence that signals total breakdown. Both men walked out of that meeting knowing the partnership was beyond repair. What happened next was a blur of corporate theater, public statements polished to perfection, and internal panic buried under rehearsed smiles. The arbitration panel's findings arrived too late to stop the avalanche. Horner was already gone, swept out by a tide of internal politics and superstar leverage. And while the legal ruling technically favored him, declaring his dismissal premature and improperly executed, the real-world implications were far more devastating. Within the paddock, it wasn't the legality that mattered, but the narrative. And the story being told now is one of a team that lost its unity, sacrificed a veteran architect of its success, and handed the keys of the kingdom to a driver who now wields more influence than anyone ever should. This wasn't just a firing. It was a hostile takeover. And what comes next for Red Bull isn't just a matter of lap times or championship points. It's a question of whether a fractured empire can survive when its own champions are at war. In the shadows of the Formula One world, a silent battle had been escalating for far longer than anyone outside the inner circle ever imagined. It wasn't simply a disagreement or a shift in vision. It was a calculated strategic campaign that unfolded behind closed doors, driven by none other than Jos Verstappen. Far from being a passive presence in his son's racing empire, Jos had assumed the role of political operator, weaving a narrative through the corridors of Red Bull's hierarchy, pressing seasoned figures like Helmut Marko to consider what he saw as an undeniable truth. Christian Horner no longer represented the future of the team. Insiders, speaking only under strict anonymity due to the explosive nature of the situation, painted a vivid picture of Jos relentlessly pushing an agenda, one that suggested Horner had grown out of step with the evolving identity of Red Bull Racing. Jos reportedly argued that the team had entered a new era, one that demanded fresh energy, unflinching loyalty to a singular vision, and above all, complete synchronization between management, driver, and branding direction. Horner, in Jos's view, had become a relic of an older chapter, too traditional, too political, and no longer aligned with the aggressive, performance-obsessed culture surrounding Max Verstappen. But this wasn't mere backroom gossip. Jos took deliberate action. According to confidential legal insiders, he quietly reached out to high-level contract lawyers with deep experience in sports arbitration. He tasked them with dissecting every clause of Horner's ironclad agreement, hunting for even the slightest vulnerability. He wasn't seeking mediation, he wanted leverage. His aim was to understand whether Red Bull could sever ties with Horner while bypassing the significant financial consequences built into his termination clause. What began as cautious inquiry turned into a detailed legal blueprint, a playbook for removal without compensation. Over time, the whispers became louder, more urgent, and finally impossible to ignore. Legal teams reportedly debated semantics in performance clauses, explored behavioral breaches, and examined the nuances of Horner's role as both a public face and private executive. FIA regulators, upon later review, determined that this plan was less about organizational need and more about engineering a forced exit under the pretense of crisis. Their conclusion was damning. Red Bull, led by internal agitators, had operated in clear bad faith, crafting a narrative designed to justify a decision that had already been made behind the scenes. Then came the explosion. The timing was as brutal as it was unexpected. Within just 2 days of a tense and volatile exchange between Horner and top-tier Red Bull executives, everything changed. There was no drawn-out process, no carefully prepared transition. Horner was summoned to a tightly controlled meeting at headquarters, presented with a decision in blunt, final terms, and summarily removed. Witnesses say he barely had time to respond before being escorted from the premises. His keycards were deactivated, his digital presence scrubbed, and internal staff were instructed not to contact him. The sheer velocity of his removal stunned the paddock. Even in a sport known for drama and sudden shifts, this move felt unprecedented in its speed and severity. The real controversy, however, wasn't just the execution, it was the legality. As revealed by regulatory documents and whistleblowers within the organization, Red Bull failed to comply with a core stipulation in the Executive Leadership Agreement, a binding 30-day written notice requirement. Known internally as a protective clause for high-level staff, this rule was put in place to guard against impulsive firings and ensure continuity at the helm of the team. Red Bull's attempt to bypass this requirement by citing urgent operational necessities and strategic realignment was viewed by FIA legal experts as deeply insufficient. These justifications, while dramatic, were empty of contractual authority. Under regulatory frameworks, such phrases are considered vague, subjective, and ultimately irrelevant in the context of executive dismissal. The violation wasn't just procedural, it was philosophical. It signaled a willingness to tear down institutional safeguards in favor of internal power plays. For those watching closely, the message was crystal clear. This wasn't a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. It was a surgical strike, carried out with stunning efficiency, driven by personalities who believed that Horner's continued presence was a threat to the empire they were trying to build around Max Verstappen. What looked on the surface like a sudden shift was, in reality, the final act of a long-orchestrated takedown, one that rewrote the rules of team governance and sent a chilling signal to everyone within the Formula One ecosystem: no one is untouchable. Not even the architect of an era. Christian Horner, long regarded as the architect of Red Bull's dynastic dominance in Formula One, has chosen to keep a deliberate and enigmatic silence as the chaos around him intensifies. Publicly, he said very little, barely a whisper. But behind the scenes, a very different story has taken shape. Those closest to him have described a man stunned by a ruthless betrayal from within the very fortress he helped build. The shock was real. The ambush was brutal. Allies turned their backs, knives were drawn behind closed doors, and for the first time in years, the team principal known for his poise and strategy was left reeling. Yet even as the ground shifted beneath his feet, Horner has not collapsed. He's gathering strength in the shadows, rallying his defenses, and preparing to fight, not just for his position, but for the truth, for his name, and for the soul of the team. From the moment whispers of sabotage began to circulate, Horner's legal squad mobilized with surgical precision. What followed wasn't a basic rebuttal, it was an all-out counterattack. Documents were compiled. Patterns of misconduct were uncovered. Pages of allegations were met with detailed accusations of backstabbing, contract violations, and orchestrated slander from individuals determined to see him fall. This wasn't just a matter of office politics, it was a cold, calculated move to rip power away from him and rewrite Red Bull's internal history. His legal team worked with the ferocity of a group that knew this was bigger than one man. It was about dismantling a machine built on loyalty, leadership, and performance. The growing unrest didn't go unnoticed by rival teams. Inside the paddock, whispers turned into frantic phone calls. Several team bosses, previously content to watch Red Bull's turmoil from a distance, began to worry. If this kind of internal warfare became the new blueprint for settling disputes within elite teams, the entire competitive ecosystem of Formula One could be at risk. Concern turned to action. Senior figures began to discreetly pressure the FIA, pushing for an external review, not to protect Horner, but to safeguard the integrity of the sport itself. The governing body, cornered by the weight of concern, launched a full-scale inquiry. What they discovered shook the foundation of the sport. The ruling was devastating. A staggering $40 million penalty was just the beginning. Red Bull Racing was ordered to participate in a series of unrelenting audits before the end of the current championship calendar. The demand wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Any refusal to cooperate or delay in transparency could trigger even harsher consequences, including point subtractions that would cripple their title campaign. But the most disturbing element of the FIA's findings wasn't financial, it was forensic. Within the core of the investigation was a bombshell: deliberate falsification of critical internal records. According to the FIA's detailed report, a senior member of Red Bull's executive board was implicated in doctoring digital data to make it appear that Horner had missed vital meetings and failed to respond to mounting driver complaints. It was a narrative crafted with intent, a story designed to paint him as indifferent, detached, and incompetent at a time when Verstappen's demands were growing more volatile and his engineering requirements increasingly complex. The deception was artful. The motive was malicious. But digital footprints don't lie. The FIA cyber specialists unearthed deleted backups, restored hidden metadata, and exposed the manipulation. The truth was undeniable. Horner had been fully engaged, answering urgent matters, especially during Verstappen's most erratic phases, often with urgency and precision. He wasn't absent, he was leading from the front, immersed in every decision, responding to tension within the team, and attempting to balance egos, performance data, and technical strategies under immense pressure. The altered evidence wasn't just misleading, it was fabricated with purpose. The reaction across Formula One was immediate and electric. Panic rippled through Red Bull's corridors. Key figures within the organization scrambled to contain the fallout, while partners and sponsors flooded inboxes demanding explanations. In the garages and pit lanes of rival teams, disbelief turned into outrage. Even neutral observers were stunned at the scale of deceit revealed. What had once been admired as a team of relentless innovation now faced accusations of internal betrayal, of tearing itself apart from the inside. Horner now finds himself standing atop a fractured empire, surrounded by shifting allegiances, exposed agendas, and uncertainty at every turn. He is no longer merely a team principal, he is a man under siege, holding firm as waves of scrutiny crash around him. The battle he's facing is no longer about race strategy or championship points. It's about clearing his name, exposing the truth, and proving that loyalty and leadership still mean something in a sport that too often devours its heroes. His opponents may have underestimated his resilience. They may have misjudged his willingness to go to war for what he believes in. Because beneath the silence, beneath the poised exterior and the carefully measured statements, there is a storm building, a storm that could consume not just those who plotted against him, but an entire structure built on illusion. Christian Horner is not finished. Far from it. What comes next might not just change Red Bull. It could alter Formula One forever. As the ashes of Red Bull's once commanding supremacy scatter across the paddock, an unsettling truth begins to take hold. What many assumed to be an invincible unit was, in reality, a fragile ecosystem held together by strained loyalties and silent tensions. Behind the gleaming trophies and record-breaking performances, a storm had been silently brewing, masked by victories and podiums. Now that storm has erupted into full view, and the racing world is left in disbelief at just how deep the fractures go. Beneath the surface of what looked like a streamlined operation, there were simmering conflicts, power grabs, and personal ambitions that no longer coexist within the same walls. The internal deterioration isn't just speculation, it's being felt, lived, and breathed by those who spent years building the powerhouse from the ground up. Individuals close to the heart of the operation, many of whom have stood shoulder to shoulder through highs and lows, are now walking away. Max got exactly what he was fighting for, revealed a trusted source inside the garage. But in his pursuit of control, he may have destroyed the very structure that made his success possible. Christian wasn't merely a figurehead, he was the anchor, the stabilizer, the protector of the team's spirit. That spirit, the one that made Red Bull more than just a racing outfit, is now flickering. The psychological toll on the organization is undeniable. Senior personnel, people with unmatched experience and decades of dedication, are no longer willing to remain silent. Several have already handed in resignations, not over salary or technical disagreements, but due to something far more serious, a collapse in values. One of the lead minds behind recent championship-winning machinery stated privately, when Christian left, the soul left with him. Now it just feels corporate, mechanical, empty. What's left is a facade, driven by someone who believes the machine revolves solely around him. Those departing aren't just engineers, they're culture bearers. People who believed in unity, collaboration, and mutual respect. Now they find themselves in a place where influence is concentrated in one corner of the garage, where dissent is unwelcome, and where loyalty is no longer reciprocal. The new dynamic is not just shifting, it's breaking. Max Verstappen's growing authority within the team is no longer a secret. It's become the dominant force. While some admire his drive and focus, others are deeply concerned about how much control one driver has been allowed to wield. It's not just about performance anymore, it's about balance, about leadership, about whether the structure can survive a personality that eclipses it. Those who once viewed Red Bull as a benchmark now shake their heads. Rival engineers whisper that this level of driver domination is unsustainable. Team bosses quietly question how a championship-winning organization could risk so much by allowing its internal cohesion to be torn apart. One cannot help but wonder, how long can a team operate when it becomes a one-man show? And Christian Horner? He may be absent from the pit wall, but he's far from irrelevant. In fact, insiders say he's gearing up for a battle that might redefine his legacy. Legal teams have reportedly been assembled. Conversations about reputational harm, character defamation, and institutional negligence are taking shape behind the scenes. The damage done wasn't just professional, it was personal, and Horner intends to fight back with every tool at his disposal. But it doesn't stop there. High-level whispers suggest Horner is being courted by multiple organizations, including those preparing for a revolution in 2026. With major regulation changes around the corner, ambitious manufacturers are scouting for proven leaders with vision, courage, and tactical brilliance. Two names keep surfacing: Aston Martin and Audi. Both are said to be in preliminary discussions, both understand the magnitude of what Horner represents, and both are ready to pounce if the opportunity arises. Sources close to those negotiations describe a sense of urgency. Horner's reputation may be bruised, but his credibility remains intact. Teams know he's more than a manager. He's a symbol of resilience, a strategist who's navigated chaos and emerged stronger. Bringing him on board wouldn't just be a recruitment, it would be a statement. As these discussions unfold behind closed doors, the sport watches with anticipation. The collapse of harmony within Red Bull isn't just affecting one team, it's sending shockwaves through the entire paddock. Alliances are shifting. Strategies are evolving. And while Verstappen continues to dominate on track, questions about the sustainability of this new structure grow louder with every race. There's admiration, yes, but there's also unease. Because behind the speed, behind the victories, there's a sense that something vital has been lost. Something that even lap times can't recover. The Formula One world is witnessing a transformation, raw, emotional, and utterly gripping. What began as quiet unrest has become a storyline of betrayal, ambition, and an unraveling empire. The consequences are just beginning. And no one, no driver, no executive, no team, is safe from what comes next. The atmosphere surrounding Red Bull is crackling with unease, tension, and relentless speculation as the aftermath of a monumental internal shakeup sends tremors across every inch of the Formula One grid. Behind the polished smiles and PR-polished statements lies a fragile ecosystem, one that's threatening to unravel beneath the surface. Max Verstappen may be contractually tied to Red Bull until 2028, but in Formula One, loyalty is conditional, paper deals are fragile, and even the tightest commitments can disintegrate under pressure. The paddock whispers are intensifying, murmurs turning into full-blown suspicions that the three-time world champion might already be re-evaluating everything: his trust, his path forward, and whether Red Bull is still the fortress it once promised to be. Within this shifting landscape, the Dutch driver, known for his relentless aggression and uncompromising hunger to dominate, now finds himself at a crossroads. It's not about performance anymore. His talent is unquestionable. It's about the environment around him, the power dynamics collapsing in real time, the once steady leadership now appearing fractured and unsure. Verstappen built his empire at Red Bull, but empires are not immune to internal decay. And if a rival, particularly Mercedes, were to sense the perfect moment to strike, to extend an offer with the right mix of engineering prowess, competitive assurances, and a vision of sustained glory, could even Max resist? The timing couldn't be more volatile. With Toto Wolff rumored to be stepping back, Mercedes stands on uncertain ground, but also at the precipice of reinvention. The idea of pairing their legacy with Verstappen's current dominance is no longer outlandish. It's the kind of bold, era-defining move that could alter the sport's trajectory for years to come. Conversations are happening behind closed doors, silent nods exchanged in hospitality suites, glances between representatives that carry volumes of meaning. Verstappen might have once laughed off the idea of ever donning silver, but in the chaos Red Bull now faces, the unthinkable has started to feel plausible. Amidst the swirling uncertainty, another figure refuses to fade into the backdrop. Christian Horner, long considered the mastermind behind Red Bull's meteoric ascent, is not limping away from controversy. He's thriving within it. What was intended to tarnish him has, in a dramatic twist, elevated his legend. After weathering a firestorm of accusations, boardroom tensions, and public scrutiny, he walks away not defeated but emboldened. With $20 million awarded in damages and a wave of unexpected support rallying around him from fans, sponsors, and even rival teams, Horner is not disappearing. He's recalibrating, sharpening his strategy, and plotting his next move with methodical precision. What makes his resurgence so gripping isn't just the drama, it's the defiance. He's not pleading for redemption, he's commanding it. There's a certain fury in his posture now, not of a man scorned, but of a tactician reawakened. The paddock, once eager to distance itself from the noise, is now watching him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Will he return as team principal of another squad? Could he build something from the ground up, backed by allies quietly drawn to his resilience? Or will he operate in the shadows, pulling the strings of a new power structure entirely? No one is quite sure. And that's precisely why the intrigue around him continues to grow. The silence in his wake is louder than any interview. Every step he takes now is strategic. Every conversation he engages in feels like a spark to a larger fire. This isn't just about a leadership dispute anymore. This is about who will seize control of the future. The line between power and irrelevance in Formula One is razor-thin, and Christian Horner is walking that tightrope with the confidence of someone who's been to the edge before and returned stronger. Max Verstappen's future hangs in delicate balance. Mercedes waits in the wings, perhaps plotting a seismic recruitment move. Red Bull teeters between holding firm and crumbling under pressure. And Christian Horner, the man who refuses to vanish, looms larger than ever. This is not the end of his story. If anything, it feels like the thrilling beginning of a new chapter, one written in whispers, in silence, in moves no one sees coming until it's too late. And when that moment comes, the paddock won't just react, they'll be forced to follow.